It's so good to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Brower. I'm the demographer for the state of Minnesota. Demographer is responsible for counting people, tracking trends, those kinds of things, and I am thrilled to be here today to kind of give you a sense for what we see for the demographic future for Koochiching County. And I'll say that the reason why I got into demographics in the first place, I know it's kind of a strange thing to be interested in and kind of dedicate your life to, but the thing that interests me so much about demographics is it gives you a pretty clear view into the future. You can see kind of where things are coming from about 50 years before. You can see where they're headed about 50 years into the future or so. And so by focusing on demographics, you get a really good sense of what the future may bring. Demographic trends don't move that much. They don't move very fast. It's really not that hard to read them. And so what I share with you today probably won't surprise you, but I hope it will give you a clear vision of kind of the timing, the scale, and kind of just what your expectations for the demographic future of this county are likely to be. And I'll put that in the context of Minnesota as well, because a lot of what's happening in Minnesota is carrying through to Koochiching County as well. Can you hear me okay? Is this all good? Okay. If I start talking like this and I forget, please wave your hand, let me know. We'll have lots of time for questions, and it's kind of cut out, I think. We have a lot of time for questions, discussion at the end here, but I'm going to give you all kinds of numbers to start out with because I speak in numbers and in slides, I guess. Okay, so let me start out just by telling you that I do work for the state of Minnesota, but we're a tiny little office in state government. There are 5 of us. There are 4 demographers and a program person, and we're not appointed by the governor. We're not, it's kind of going in and out, right? Okay, so we're a little office. I am not appointed by the government. I'm nonpartisan, civil service, hired for my expertise in demographics, so I'll be here no matter who the administration is. We're responsible for making population estimates for every city and township. We also have a helpline, which if you, in your work you need a data point, you're like, I need to know how many children there are who are ages 6 to 9 or something. That's the kind of thing we can help you find. And other kind of social and economic data as well. So please do feel free to reach out to our helpline or to email us if you've got questions.
Question.
Yes?
Is that actual? Like if we ask you, how many 6 to 9-year-olds are there right now?
Oh, like is it in my head?
No.
Because no.
That means the numbers that you have available, are they accurate to what, like if we're trying to start a daycare and it's like how many 6 to 9-year-olds are actually here right now?
Yeah.
How accurate is that?
We have access to the most accurate data available. How accurate is a different question. It's based on how good the census was in the area and how much time has been between the last census. But we do have interim estimates that the Census Bureau produces at the county level for really detailed stuff like that. So my answer is as accurate as is out there. And it's not necessarily ours. We're just going to point you to the best estimate that we know about. Yeah, thanks for the question. I thought I was going to get a on the spot how many 6 to 9-year-olds are. I was like, oh, I should have used a different example. I knew. Okay. So this is us. We also work with the Census Bureau around the censuses to make sure that people are ready for them when they come, although it's the Census Bureau's responsibility to take the census. Okay, so here's what's happening with the population in the state of Minnesota overall and our projections for it. We're expecting that even though the state has been growing and growing and growing for all of time, back to 1860, you can see there, that we're at a point where it's starting to level off and will not grow with the same speed that it has in the past. And this is because we are aging as a state, and because when you're an older society, when you're an older state, an older community, you just don't grow as fast. So people who are in their 60s and 70s tend not to have children. I didn't need a PhD to tell you this. We all know this. Tend not to have children, and they tend to be also, when you get into your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, in the higher mortality age groups. And so it's much, much harder for a state to grow when it's an older state. And so the reason I draw all of this out is to help you understand that some of the demographic trends that we're experiencing, they're just playing out kind of the natural course of life. That when you have a lot of people in a community who are in their 20s, in their 30s, you're going to have more babies. And when you have a lot of people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, you're going to have fewer babies. And so we don't always see this when we're just walking around, but kind of this is the reality of growth, is that it's really historically been fueled by the people who already live in the state or in the community. And so just given who lives in the state of Minnesota right now, we make our projections for the future and see that we're just not going to have the same level of growth that we've had in the past. Some states are in a position where they're actually going to start declining because of this same. A lot of Midwestern states are in a position where they're going to start declining just because they don't have that same kind of demographic engine or momentum that they used to have. And so typically when people are thinking about how does a state or a community grow, and I think they do this specifically when we're talking about individual communities that you know, and you're thinking about population growth, most people's minds go straight to migration. And they think, well, who's moving away? Well, who's moving to a place? And that's really what's going to fuel population growth. But really, historically, what has fueled population growth is the number of births that a place has, and the number of births compared to the number of deaths. And so this natural change is really the growth engine of our state and the growth engine of our communities. And migration historically has played a really small role in the overall growth. But what's happening, and again, this is state level, I will get into Koochiching County specifically, but just to kind of give you the broader context, what's happening now is that as we age, we have fewer and fewer, or less and less natural increase because of the reasons that I just talked about. And as a result, migration will make up a larger and larger share of our overall growth if we continue to receive people to the state. If we were not to have any migration at all statewide, our state would begin to decline in size by the 2040s. As you can see, that natural change starts to go negative. And again, that's because we start aging, we have more deaths than we have births. And so we're at a point right now in the state where migration is becoming more and more important to growth. So whether it's migration from another state, international immigration from other countries, it becomes a more prominent source of growth because there's not a whole lot we can do about the other stuff. I'll show you what birth rates look like in a moment, and we'll talk a little bit about mortality as well. But generally, those things are pretty fixed. There's not a whole lot that's going to change either the birth rate or kind of the life expectancy. It'll change a little bit. It'll keep moving, hopefully, toward longer and longer life expectancies. But it's not something that fluctuates wildly from year to year or changes in a way that's really unexpected. And so I draw this all out just to tell you that we're kind of marching along toward this demographic future that's pretty easy to read. We've got dampened growth because of our aging population. We've got an increase in importance in migration. Whether or not we'll have it kind of come through or fully compensate the growth is probably another question.
Question.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I like.
You have, even the screen before, you had the one before that, sorry. Where were your projections compared to
How did we do?
Yeah.
Pretty well. I will say that for the state overall, we take rates of births, we take rates of death, and we take rates of migration, and those rates are so stable, kind of so predictable, that they do a really pretty good job of projecting the future. I looked back at like my offices. I've been here 14 years, but the office has been in place for 30, and they're really quite good because those things don't fluctuate a whole lot. They're really pretty easy to know that that's kind of the limits on growth. For many counties, that's the case as well, but when you start getting to smaller counties and you start getting to smaller communities, demographics don't do as well in terms of predicting the future, and that's because migration can fluctuate so much from time to time. So I'm much, much more confident in this graph than what I'll show you in a moment for Koochiching, although I'm fairly confident in that too. Okay. So here's kind of the long view of Koochiching County from 1990 through 2024, and I have an asterisk on 2024 because it's preliminary, but generally you can see that it's been a slow decline over that period. Now you may notice a little uptick around the censuses, and that's really just a methodological correction. It's because the census happened, and so we rebased to the most recent census. So don't pay too much attention to say that drop in 2000. That was just because the census was taken, and so we kind of rebased to that number. Generally, just look over time, and you can see that there has been not rapid decline, but slow and steady decline for Koochiching County across this whole time period. In the recent period, it's been just a tiny little bit faster than the last 10 years, but it's possible that those are estimation errors as well. So generally, we're talking somewhere around 100 or so people per year lost each year to Koochiching County. Now, I drew out kind of all the ways that the population changes by looking at births and deaths, so we can look at that specifically for Koochiching, and this is showing you a period of 4 years. So it's saying that between 2020 and 2024, there were 470 fewer people between that time period. People lost over that time period. The natural change is the same as adding the births and the deaths together. And so you can see that most of the loss of population is attributable to deaths. And I'm sorry you all came on such a bright sunny day and I keep talking about death, but that's just the way demographics go. The reality is that is where the population is declining, is over time. It's kind of the natural change and natural kind of people living their lives out in the communities that they know and they love. Births contributed by about 400 or about 100 births per year countywide. And so you can see that that is kind of the biggest impact on your population decline has been just to the number of people who already live here in the community. And it has very little to do so far with people moving in or moving out. It's just those deaths that are really impacting the change. In terms of total migration, this is an estimate over that 4 years, and so there really isn't a whole lot of impact on migration overall. A little bit of a loss over those 4 years, just under 100 people lost. Most of that is domestic migration, moving elsewhere, and this is the net, so it may be that more people move out than move in, by about 103, but you have more movement than is actually showing in that net number there. In general, what I want you to take from this is that you're kind of on a trajectory that's based on the people who are living here now. And then the potential in terms of migration, people moving here, you could kind of lay that on top and say, well, if that's going to change, then we'll see a difference from the projections that I lay out for you. Now, Koochiching County is not alone in terms of its natural decline or having more deaths than it has births. 51 of 87 Minnesota counties are in that same boat. So every county that you see that's in light blue has a natural decline. And then the dark blue counties are those that are increasing. They have more births than they have deaths. So it's really a widespread phenomenon, particularly in greater Minnesota, and particularly where there is not as large of kind of metro areas or colleges or universities or places like that. So I mentioned that births play a part in this growth. The birth rate has been declining over time, and that's something that I expect will continue into the future. You know, if you think about maybe your grandparents' generation and how many siblings they had, and then either your generation or your children's generation, and think about the difference. For most folks, it's pretty different that our kids aren't having the same number of children that, say, our grandparents' families, the size of our grandparents' families was. Yeah?
The 38 to the 100.4 over what amount of time is that?
This is for a single year in 2023, and that is the range. So the lowest fertility rate in the state is 38 per 1,000 women of childbearing age. And the highest fertility rates, shown in the very darkest counties, are up to 100 per 1,000, or 100 in 1,000. Yeah, that's the spread. And I'd say Koochiching is kind of very average in terms of its fertility rate overall. But we're expecting for everyone that those rates will continue to decline, because that's been the case for Minnesota, it's been the case for the US, it's been the case globally that we're seeing declining fertility rates over time. It may change a little bit here and there, but just think, as I said, just think about those generational differences. And it's very unlikely that the 26-year-olds in your lives, that's the age at which you're most likely to have a baby in the States. The 26-year-olds in your life are going to have an average of, say, 5 or 6 children. That's just, there may be a few of them out there who have that number, but it's not going to be an average by any means, like maybe it was in the 1950s.
How do you get your birth data? I mean, we don't deliver babies in Koochiching County, so we have them in other counties. So how do you get your data?
So the question is, how do we get the data for this? So these come from the Minnesota Department of Health, and on a birth certificate, even if you're delivered outside of the county, you have to write down what your resident birth is. Now, are people delivered in Canada?
No.
That wouldn't happen? Okay.
They used to.
Okay, well, so that wouldn't be a problem then for these numbers. So any other county, any other state, they report back what the resident number of birth is, and it's based on administrative data of those birth certificates. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so I hope you're getting the picture that the demographic future is kind of marching toward one direction, pretty predictable, at least the births and deaths. We have seen increased life expectancy. It has stalled out at some points because of either, COVID or because of the opioid crisis. But in general, what we're seeing is longer and longer, very slow increases in life expectancy. And so we've built those into our projections as well. That we're going to continue to see a little bit of an increase in life expectancy. So migration is the other thing that's the big question mark. So what are we going to see in terms of migration for Koochiching County, for the state of Minnesota? And we can look back at the history of Koochiching County and see what migration has looked like. And what we're looking at here, the lightest green, that kind of chartreuse color, 1990 to 2000. If the graph is showing you a number that's below that axis, it means that there are more people who left than who came in that age group. So you can see that dip down in the 20 to 24-year-old age group. And then if you see something that's above that axis, it means you gained more people in that age group for that decade than you lost. So we're getting net numbers, and you can see that this is a really typical pattern over time, that you're losing people a little bit during their teens, late teens to early 20s. Oftentimes, especially in the more recent period, you seem to be gaining many back, but not as many as were initially lost. And so with all this movement, I'm sorry, I'm standing right, I'm gonna go right here. Oh wait, then I'm away from this thing. I just realized I'm standing right, no, I'm not gonna do that. What you can see is that this is a really stable pattern over time. That you have maybe some losses or some gains among school-age children. That would be when those families move in with their children. Maybe they're moving back to communities that they had moved away from previously. But the number of people moving back is not as many as the number of people who moved away when they were in their late teens or early 20s. And this is a pattern. You could go back to 1950 and it's kind of the same picture. It was too busy to show you all of those lines, but generally, you've got a really stable pattern, and it looks like many, many other counties with similar populations. Yeah?
Where do you find it?
Where do we get these numbers?
No.
Oh.
They left. Where do you find them in the demographic?
Oh.
In the metro? You find them in
Where'd they go?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good question that I don't have the answer to from this information, but I can tell you typically what happens with with college age students, that they move to a metro area, University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, or maybe North Dakota State University, or maybe another, they make that jump, and then some come back after college, and some stick around. Some follow someone that they fell in love with somewhere else, and you know what happens to 20-year-olds, yeah. They move. yeah. So mainly college is the thing that's driving people. Some of them come back and some of them go away. But specifically for Koochiching, I don't have those numbers about which colleges they go to, but we could sure look it up. Yeah.
Do you ever try to follow, like healthcare now at 26, they have to leave? Do any of those numbers, do you follow that track of younger people when they come back home for reasons, or is it so insignificant?
So do we see a change around 26?
Yeah.
Most of the change that we see happens at around 18 and 19, and then everything else after that's pretty slow and kind of, we see a reversal after college, and then it really depends on the area. So you can see that in the 1990s, Koochiching County had ongoing losses even through the working ages, which you don't appear to have anymore, at least consistently. Maybe for 1 year you had a drop out there, 45 to 49. But in general, much more positive in terms of keeping residents or pulling residents in compared to the 1990s. But we still looked at those numbers on net here, and the overall picture is still a little bit of a net loss over time, about 100 people over the course of 4 years, so about 25 people per year. It's a small number, but I just want you to kind of understand the scale relative to the births and what's happening there. And then I just wanted to give you a picture of other counties. It looks really similar to what happens in other counties. And if we were to look all across the state, we'd see the same exact dip in a county like this. The only place where we see kind of the inverse happening is when you have a college town, a county with a major kind of university or college center. You tend to see the inverse happening around 20 to 24. Okay. So if we look then at Koochiching County in a little bit more depth, here I have International Falls and the balance of Koochiching County. And again, that kind of correction that you see around the censuses probably isn't real. That's just because a census was taken, and so those numbers were kind of rebased. But generally what I just want you to see is that you do see for the balance of Koochiching County, much of which is an organized territory, but not all of it, and for International Falls, we kind of see that slow, kind of the same pattern for both. So it's not a situation where International Falls is growing rapidly and the balance is declining. That's happening in some counties across the state, but here it's really quite slow decline for both. Now, for our projections, this is what we have projected for the future. And this is not, sometimes people say, is this aspirational? Do you have feelings? This is all math, guys. This is what, when we put in kind of how Minnesota is projected to grow compared to the rest of the Midwest, and how the Midwest is projected to grow compared to the rest of Minnesota compared to the Midwest, Midwest compared to the U.S., how the regions are expected to grow, and then the birth and the death and the migration rates. This is what we come up with for our projections. When we look into the future, think about these projections as just kind of carrying out the demographic conditions that we're currently experiencing. So it's not that we're making any guesses about who's going to move away in the future or how many people are going to move away in the future. We're really just carrying forward the trends that we're seeing now in births, deaths, and migration, and applying them to the number and the age of the people that you have right now. So I tell that to you to try to get kind of hopefully the kind of feeling out of it, that it is not pessimism, it's not optimism. It really is just saying, okay, if these trends continue, you have the same number of babies that you've had in recent years, if you have a little bit longer life expectancies, if you have about the same patterns of migration that you've had in the past, this is what your population will do in terms of decline in the future. And a lot of it just has to do with the age structure, the age of the people who are living here. These projections are going to be wildly wrong if your migration patterns change. They're going to be wildly wrong if you have a baby boom that was unexpected. I don't think it's going to happen, but it could. They're going to be wildly wrong if there's some kind of technological advance that keeps us all alive until we're 150 years old. Then our numbers are going to be really wrong. But barring any of those things, this is really just carrying out the demographic future that we're currently experiencing. Just by way of comparison, I'm showing you here kind of what the projections look like for similar counties, for neighboring counties. So we are seeing more growth projected for, say, Beltrami County, with a higher kind of metro area or larger metro area. That's kind of what's fueling the growth there, the younger population there. But you can see it's not that much different from, say, Lake of the Woods and even Itasca County. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about population aging, and then I'm going to talk about school children and projections. Well, there's shorter sections than I just went through, but are there any more questions about growth that you have before I move on? Are you all done with graphs? Because you can just look at your phone if you're not. I'm just kidding. Okay. We're going to jump back to the state of Minnesota for a minute. We're looking at the state overall. And something kind of historical happened last year, 2024. For the first time in the state, it looks like 2020, but it's not, it's 2024. For the first time in the state's history, we have more older adults than we have people in school. And that's important because for the state budget, it's two of our main budget drivers are people who are older adults, who are retired, in terms of health care, needs for long-term services and support, and children who are in school and have K-12 education. Yeah.
By older adults, you mean 65 and older?
Yes, so for this particular graph, this is 65 and older. It is defined, a lot of times people in the aging field will define it as 50 or above. Demographers typically say 65 and above. If you want the specific numbers for Koochiching or Minnesota, that's something we can send your way to. But just as a general kind of way of thinking about aging, the increase is really happening between 2010 and 2030, and that's because the baby boomers are aging up over that 65-year-old age mark. And what's important to know is that we're not going to go back to being a younger state later, that we're really going to remain an older state into the foreseeable future. The baby boomers just sped that transition along in the last 10 years. So we're in this period of really big change. And if we think about where the baby boomers are in their lives, we can have a pretty good sense of what's happening to the community, to the state, and to individual communities overall. So the first of the baby boomers, born in 1946, turned age 65 in 2011, and they started retiring. And yes, not everyone retires at age 65, but it's still a pretty good proxy for when people tend to retire. And you can see that all the way through up to 2029, there's more and more baby boomers. The younger of the baby boomers will reach retirement age. And so it's really pretty clear that the impact on workforce, labor force shortages, a lot of the issues that we're currently experiencing across the state in being able to find workers are really at a difficult point right now as we're having all of these retirements. The not so great news for those of you, do we have people who are in the business of hiring and managers and hiring? The not so great news is we're still set for more retirements. We're not quite to the end of that retirement wave, but hopefully it's good to know that it's useful to know what kind of pathway we're on. The other thing is that the impact of aging baby boomers on healthcare, on long-term services that older adults will need. We've been hearing about this for all of time, right? It's almost like we don't hear it anymore because you think about the aging state, the aging population, the baby boomer, everyone thinks, oh, healthcare. That's related to healthcare issues. Those are related in the state to budget issues related to healthcare. It's really not until very recently, the last couple of years, that the baby boomers reached those older ages where disability starts to set in and those increased costs are continuing. And so we can really, what we have been expecting for a very, very long time in terms of increased need for services statewide, we're really just at the beginning of that where we'll continue to see that ramp up. We'll continue to see the impact on budgets and the increased demand for services. I mentioned that the workforce started to slow, I think, that the baby boomers, as they're leaving, impacts a slower growing labor force overall. For northern Minnesota, it's actually a slight decline over time because there's such a large number of baby boomers relative to the rest of the population. And so that trend is almost exaggerated here. I will say that there's more data for all of time that you could ever take in, and please do email me if you want it. This is just an example of the specifics for Koochiching County. You can see for your county, 28% of the population is over the age of 65, whereas the average is about 17% for the state. And so you are an older county relative to state and the U.S. overall as well. And on the left, we have what the age structure of Minnesota looks like. Just one second. And on the right, we have the age structure of Koochiching County. So if you look at the very bottom, we have the very youngest and cutest residents of the county down here. And if you think about this like it's an escalator where every 5 years everyone moves up a bar, and every 5 years from that everyone moves up a bar, you start to get the sense of what I was talking about in terms of population change, that a lot of it, it's going to be hard to have a lot more births when you have a kind of a shrinking parent age population. That there's just kind of a demographic kind of momentum or demomentum based on a population pyramid that looks like this. You had a question, yeah?
One of the things, you have the age like 60 to 70, and you're kind of following the boomer, how it gets more the transient stuff. The ones that move in,
Yeah.
that come into the community.
Yeah.
And we haven't spoken at all about this part, but do they bring wealth with them? Do they, and the reason I use that is the demographics when you're doing budgeting.
Yeah.
Like a county, if their median income is below this, they get more. But if you're attracting millionaires, you kind of go to Jacksonville, Wyoming, you go to different communities, and it really skews the
wealth of a
trying to
place.
get funding.
So first I'll say that, great question and important question. I think that a lot of people tend to overestimate how many older adults move in and out of the state or in and out of the communities. Most people stay put. Yes, we all know snowbirds, and we know a lot of snowbirds, but they're a really pretty select group if you think of everyone. They tend to be wealthier, they tend to be, older, but also kind of older. We don't see that kind of same snowbird phenomenon of people who are in, say, their late 80s. They tend to kind of come back to community and settle. So the net impact of all that moving isn't something that anyone has really been able to put their finger on. There have been kind of people who have studied whether taxes drive people away, and they haven't been able to come up with an answer except for the very, very wealthiest millionaires and people who are inventors, also a very wealthy group. So the overall net impact is a question mark, but it's possible. But what I will say is it's a relatively small number of people who move in their older ages than what we tend to think of. Okay, kids. Let's finish with kids. I looked back at Census Bureau estimates by school district. Do we have any folks? You don't have to identify yourselves from the school districts here. These are the 3 school districts in Koochiching County. And you can see that over time, the International Falls district has really kind of declined the most over time. I will say that this is the number of children living in the school district rather than those who are enrolled in the school district. So it's based on the residents of the kids who live within those boundaries. It's a number that has declined over time, and I would expect that it would continue to decline slowly based on all the kind of factors that I've talked about today. I don't. Here we have projections based on our projections of 5 to 17-year-olds in the county, in Koochiching County overall. So it's not split up by district, but generally our projections suggest that we'll continue to see smaller and smaller cohorts of young people over time. Again, just based on that demographic change, that demographic momentum that I've described here.
Excuse me,
Yes.
back where you compared Little Fork and the Falls, are you saying, is that graph saying that there were more Little Fork, Big Falls students than International Falls students?
No. Thank you for that clarification. So this is Little Fork, Big Falls is stacked on top. The number is stacked on top of. So I wanted to give you all of the county, all of the number of children in the county, broken down by, thank you for that clarification, broken down by the school district in which they live. Now, if there's a lot of open enrollment across districts, that's not going to be caught here. This is just where they live. And
so if you had side-by-side graphs of our Falls, Little Fork, and South Cooch, then that purple, the green would be below the purple, correct?
oh, absolutely. Yep. It's just a small number, and it's not declining as much over time. It's stayed pretty steady because that band has stayed steady over time. Same with South Koochiching. It's declined a little bit. The band has gotten a little bit smaller over time, but it is not declining as much as the International Falls has over time. That band has stayed about the same amount of thickness over time. Yeah, so this is, again, like all three of these together, all three of the districts together, all the 5 to 17-year-olds, our projections moving forward is that we'll continue to see a steady decline into the future. Okay. Is this going to happen? I don't know. After all of this. If things, as I said, if things continue along as they have continued, if we see the same number of births per woman, if we see the same number of deaths per older folks, if we see similar patterns of migration, these things are going to play out much in the way that I've projected here, because they're really stable. They don't fluctuate that much year to year. What kinds of things would change these trends? Well, if we see a lot more international immigration, we would see that's one of the ways that many states have seen, the only increase that many states have seen recently has been in international immigration. That could change the trend. Federal policy would need to align with that. Your housing availability, your economic kind of opportunities would need to align with that. So it's not just a given that would be something that would change the trajectory of what we see. But that is like it's much more likely that you would see growth, or a community would see growth because of international immigration than see growth because of migration from another state. Because what we've seen in Minnesota for many years is net losses to other states. It's a Midwest phenomenon. So if we're going to talk about like what is the likelihood of Koochiching's growth changing, the greatest likelihood would be because of international immigration. And of course all those things would need to align. Federal policy, economic, housing, all those things would need to align for new Americans to kind of find their way here. Climate change is something that also could shift patterns in the future. Right now, people are moving to the Southwest, where there is the least amount of water available to folks, where in some cases they're moving to the coasts where there's lots of natural disasters. And at some point, it is very likely that we will see different migration patterns just because of climate change. We're not there yet. We haven't seen that turnaround yet. and the Midwest tends to send more people away than we gain. And so that's something that could be out in the future, but it's a question mark.
But,
Yeah.
we have people leaving, you were Southwest, we have people leaving it cold. Because they're done. I don't want the cold anymore, I want to leave it.
Yeah.
And they find a climate that they like. But with that comes more people, crime, whatever you want to, and they long to have this again. But if the climate does change, where we're warmer here than we are now, sorry, we might not have the monkey here anymore. But if it warms up, do they come back? Or is it more?
I'll say, I mean, it's possible. I'll say that people tend to move places that they know. So maybe they return if they were here from before. They tend to move where there's economic opportunity or where they know people, have some kind of a relationship. So a lot of it is just your network, your economic, your social network that drives migration flows. So sure, maybe people will move back because they're like, oh, I used to live in this great place. It was beautiful. It used to be way too cold for me. Maybe I'll give it another try. It would be unlikely that you would see someone who's living in Tucson make that same determination if they don't have the same ties. So I'll end on this note that I hope that I've provided you with like a sense of kind of the power of demographics to kind of see the future. I feel like it may not be the future that you were expecting or hoping for maybe, because lots of times people put growth with a high value judgment. And I just want to say, let's try to separate those things and think about how do you have a community that is a thriving community, a place where people want to live and where they love each other and take care of each other, and maybe it's not growing. How do you do that? How do you provide services under a low growth or a declining phenomenon? It's really might just be the reality of where many of our communities, not just International Falls, not just Koochiching County, but many communities across the state are today, are in thinking like, how do we move forward knowing that we may not have growth or that the declines that we've seen in recent years are likely to continue. So I hope that I've given you some of that context for future conversations about where we go from here. And with that, please do reach out if you have questions, and I'll take them right now too. Yeah.
Do you have demographics that can show housing, because housing must have something to do with it. So if you laid housing demographics on top of population demographics, does it show that the housing declines based on the population, or does the housing, because like right now I drive around I Falls and I know that people say there's a lack of housing.
Yeah.
However, there are a number of places that have fallen apart,
yeah,
and it appears nobody's taking care of them. So if they were improved, so people could live. Is there some way that shows that pulls people in when there's more housing available?
What I will say, did everyone hear the question? Okay. I haven't seen anything that would pull people in if the housing is available without also economic opportunities. But I will say that housing is the thing that is keeping many people out. So it is a barrier. And what you've described in terms of around the area that you described, many other communities across the state are in the same place where they're seeing declining quality of housing while they're having, even though they have shortages. So it's an issue that I think is one that's top of mind for a lot of folks.
Because if you have healthcare, like I own a group home, you've got healthcare agencies, they're constantly looking for people. And yet you can't provide housing for them. When you say economics may drive the population, however, how do you get economics to drive it if you don't have any housing for those people?
Exactly. So it's the barrier. But if it opened up and there were housing, it wouldn't necessarily be the pull. So it's a barrier, certainly a barrier to people moving in, and we see that across the state when there's lack of housing or lack of housing that's affordable. There's many employers who say, I want to hire 20 more people, but there's no place to put them. I hear that many places where I go. So it's a barrier to people moving in, but I don't know for sure that just having the housing there, it may be, but I don't know the answer to that.
Right, because if they say 20 more people, we can hire. I could maybe open one more group home too. We could have more economics, a better economy, if we had better housing.
Could be. And I think, part of what has opened up in the last 4 years, although it's returning a little bit, is that people are increasingly separated from having to go into a physical location. And so the number of places that they could work, the distance that they could work from there, not true in group homes, not true in healthcare, but many other occupations, there's much more freedom to move around than there has been in the past. And so the economic engine may be more centered in healthcare, or in housing, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Have you seen any changes to certain areas because of the remote worker trend? Have people congregated in certain areas in the state? And what was the driver of those locations?
Yeah.
I suppose it's just because they like being there.
Yeah.
And then, is there any trend that would affect our county that you can see?
So what we have seen since the pandemic has been more growth just north of the Twin Cities, but it hasn't extended all the way up north, certainly to Koochiching or even kind of mid-range. That we've seen more migration in the center. I don't know that it has to do with the pandemic necessarily. It may have to do with retirement migration, people moving to the cabin. It may have to do with both. But what we definitely have seen is more migration kind of in the mid part of the state, north of the Twin Cities, that we hadn't seen in prior decades. When people move, we don't register a move. Nobody wants to register when they move. There's not an appetite for it in the US. So our migration numbers are a little fuzzy. We don't have really clear, we don't ask people, why did you move? So we have to make some guesses just based on the age of people. We know older people are moving north. We don't know if it's fully they're moving to the lake home or if it's really that they're moving to a permanent location and working there. So that's what we know. It's an incomplete picture, but that's what we got. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming. I think a lot of people are aware of this trend, maybe not the specific number, but it's a little alarming, and yet I think people that spend some time looking at this believe it. But one of the things that skews us a little bit here is on the Canadian border. We have this relationship with Canada, where a lot of the spouses on both sides, that we've got people living there and working here. And I don't know where that, you kind of graph that trend is. I'm sure it's pretty stable over the years, but what's happening across affects us, and what happens here affects them, and so it's a little bit skewed here.
That's a great point. Hadn't thought of it. You're absolutely right. I have a black hole where outside of the U.S. with data, so absolutely.
Well, that's just another example of that. When we're marketing the area, oftentimes, like retailers, spend a lot of time looking at these, income levels, population, and they think that the population stops at the Canadian border. When you look at the retail draw, it goes 100 miles north, and so that number becomes much larger.
Yeah.
So to create the proper picture for them, you gotta kind of help draw that
Yeah.
out.
And that's a great kind of connection to what you were saying, is that the economic kind of opportunity doesn't necessarily have to be right here. It could be on the other side of the border as well. Yeah. And it sounds like it already is. That that's a draw for folks. Yeah. Anything else? Is this surprising to folks about what you expected? I don't know. Not sure, taking it in.
Just a quick question, like regional migration, I guess I am a little bit, when you say birth and death rates, is there a migration away from the rural areas to the metro areas?
There is, but it's complicated. So if we go back, I'm always thinking in graphs, so I would say that a lot of that, the losses that you're seeing in the late teens, early 20s is probably toward metro areas that have those colleges or universities. It might not be the Twin Cities metro. It might be, say, Morris or something. It's just that's kind of the draw and the pattern is college migration or young adult migration. But a consistent pattern is also that people come back. And you can see that in the last 20 years too, is that you have this positive net almost across that life course, certainly in the late 30s, early 40s, that people are coming back to Koochiching, or they're finding it for the first time. And so while we do see those net losses to more rural areas, it's from all kinds of movement back and forth over the life course. But yes, it is a driver, but it's a driver that's relatively minor compared to what's happening for people who are just living here already. It still matters. It's still 103 people over 4 years, right? But it's not at the same level as just kind of the momentum from people who are living here. Yeah.
Does any of your work get into causality? What causes these changes? And if it does, any observations? And if it doesn't, where might we go to look for that?
What are you thinking in terms of which causality?
Just trying to understand what's driving these changes as opposed to just having a picture that they've occurred. Because the message you send is we have to sit here and take it.
No,
But
not necessarily.
It'd be nice if we didn't have to.
Not necessarily. Because I'd say that there are certainly opportunities in terms of international migration, but that you're going to have to think in terms of housing too. And so I would say that, when we go back here, I don't think there's going to be anything that changes. There's all kinds of research on why the birth rate's declining. It's long-standing, but has to do with kind of economic opportunities for women, women who've entered the workforce. It gets more expensive to have children. There's a long economic argument about why we're seeing fewer and fewer children across the globe. In terms of why the death rates are just the death rates, so we know that there's a little bit of increase due to health factors. Our educators could stand up here and tell us about the upstream factors that impact health, but certainly healthcare and access to technologies that improve longevity are also factors there. In terms of migration, at the individual level, the factors why people move are for family, for jobs, not healthcare. They don't move specifically. It's not at the top of the list. They might move for healthcare, but certainly family, jobs, housing. Family, jobs, housing are at the top of the list for why people make an interstate move. a change in their family, a spouse dies, a grandchild is born, a child is born. You know, all those things are big reasons that push people. In terms of international migration, people come for economic opportunities, or they're pushed away because of something bad that's happening in their own home countries. So there are kind of causal factors to each of these things, but when you roll them up, they're pretty stable. It doesn't mean there's no control over them. It means that you gotta dig down pretty deep to the individual level to start thinking, how do we recruit one family to come here or 10 families to come here? Where would they go? Where would they work? Would they feel comfortable here? You know, all those kinds of things. You got to really dig down deep to that individual level.
Do you guys track the number of jobs over time, or medium income and all that, so we can look back 30 years to say
What's happened?
See those
Yeah.
things too.
So we can sure show median income, and I can point you to jobs with deed for sure. Yeah, I don't have them in my head though.
Let me just help to paint the
Yeah.
other part of the picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said those three things, family, economic, and housing. We can't control family, government.
Yep.
Jobs we can kind of control,
Yep.
kind of, but housing seems that when the market doesn't come in, government tries to help as much as we can to get housing. And housing is by far the most lacking in rural Minnesota. Whether it's International Falls, Grand Marais, Detroit Lakes, wherever it is,
Everywhere I go.
it's like the issue.
Yeah.
How do we focus? How do we take this study or your office and help focus the folks that make these decisions to say, housing is really important, dummies. Do something about it.
I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think that, you know, I hear it everywhere I go, and so I think you can join with other like-minded counties and cities and say, this is the top priority for us.
So 2 days ago, I was in Grand Marais. They have a 36-unit apartment building they're building. The funding that they put together was a loan, and 47 people in the community invested. And that, when communities help community, that's how vested they are. Because there's 5,636 people, that's it. Cook County, not very many people. So they couldn't get funding anywhere else. They needed housing because in the
Private
summer,
investment.
everybody moves up there to buy the house, and then they rent it, and the people that need to work don't have anywhere to live.
Yeah.
And it's similar here in this town, there's some of that going on. So what I'm saying is, I'm watching where a community just says, we need to do this. And they're willing to invest in themselves. And I'm really curious how the demographics, will the demographics follow housing? You know, like, let's say International Falls said, we need housing, we're gonna, or Cooch County, let's use the whole county, we need housing, and we're gonna invest in housing, that's our #1 priority.
I mean, it sounds like you have the test case to see, right?
Well-
And I think my sense is just from the demand that I hear, that there is pent-up demand for it, but again, you're gonna have to make sure that that economic resource is there too. And it might be there just because you have internet access. If you have access to be able to work remotely, that might be all that you absolutely need. But I will say that sometimes these demographic trends, especially now that we're getting into territory where we haven't been, and you might feel like you're moving in a direction where they're, like as you said, we might just take it. I don't think it's true that you just have to take what your response is. I think you might have to take what the demographic, maybe not. You might be able to turn around some of the migration numbers, but your response isn't laid out by these numbers at all. It has nothing to do with them. What you want to do with this information and what you decide your joint community future is, that's totally up to you. And in fact, sometimes the demographics give us more leeway to do things that we couldn't do before because we can't keep going as we have. And so when it breaks stuff, when it breaks the way we've always done things, it gives you that opportunity to say, hey, why don't we try this? We know this isn't going to keep working, so why don't we try this new thing I dreamed up? And maybe, you know, I may have sounded for most of the time I was talking to you like I was bringing a message of gloom and doom, and I apologize for that. I really just wanted you to understand the reality, but I really don't think it has anything to do with what your collective future might look like. I think you can respond to these numbers in any way you want, in any way you wish. If you continue down the path you're already on, you might end up in a place that's more that may not be where you want to be, just because of we don't have the sustaining numbers in the state overall to kind of sustain the level of growth that we have in the past. I saw a hand over here, and I don't want to call you up, but if you still have a question.
Oh, that was me. I had a similar question, like causation. I mean,
Oh, okay.
Just looking at, some of those other rural counties, like Roseau County, for example.
Oh, yeah.
If you use that as a case study, why are people going there? Is it housing? Is it economics?
Is it DigiKey? I mean, it looks really, to me, when I'm up there, it looks like there's a big economic, and I could be wrong, but it looks like there's an economic. Marvin Windows?
And Polaris. Marvin and Polaris.
What's the other one?
Polaris.
Oh, Polaris. And
And
DigiKey.
Marvin.
Yeah, and DigiKey.
Is in,
Yeah. So I'd say you can see the difference though, right? I mean, like it brings in younger, so it brings in younger people. Some of the darker counties that you see there have to do with the reservations. And so you see younger growing populations on those for Monoman, for example. But for Roseau, I really think that that's a different kind of economic situation that's probably driving that natural growth. And it may not be that high even. I'm just showing you if there's more births. It may be like there's 2 births. I can share the numbers with you. But so it may not be as big of a contrast as this map makes it look.
I don't know if this is helpful or not.
Oh, yeah.
I used to live in Roseau County.
Yeah.
And I know that the city, the towns, the city council, the county board, and all that partnered with the Marvins and Polaris and are working together to try and recruit people to move into the county. So it was a joint effort.
Okay.
So I think that might have had something to do with it.
Yeah, did everyone do that? So a joint effort between business and the public, the county, city.
And they have a lot of new housing there.
And new housing.
Been there lately, yeah.
Okay.
Apartment buildings.
So, again, I don't know if I'm belaboring this or not, but it sounds like there's a lot of people talking about this. So, do you have any kind of data that if people wanted to go to their county and say, we need to build more housing, do we have anything that we can show to people that says, if trends are, if we build housing, this much of the economy has improved? Do you ever get details like that?
I'm going to look for you. If you would give me your contact information, it's not something that I personally study, but Minnesota Housing has a research department, and they are much more familiar with the link between housing and growth than I would be, because I'm a population guy. So I'd be happy to look that up and get back to you.
Right, because if anybody, any county is going to want to increase housing, they're going to want to look at numbers and look at what other places have done and what happens. We can't prove it to anyone. You're never going to sell the idea. So yes, I will.
Yeah, and what I can tell you from the numbers that I'm very familiar with is I have numbers on the housing stock availability when it was built, which can give you an overall picture of what you have now. You may have that in other sources too, but just so you know, compared to, you can compare it to other similarly situated cities or counties and say, what's different here? If a report doesn't already exist, you could do your own digging. Yeah. Yeah.
Does that housing data look at second homes and seasonal homes and things like that? And or is there an office in Minnesota that is looking at seasonality of housing stuff and
In the decennial census, there's a question about whether a house is used for seasonal, or where a dwelling unit is used for seasonal or recreational use. So we have an overall count for areas, but then we don't have that specific information about when recreational house was built. So we have again, a kind of incomplete picture, but we have some of that. You could say X many houses are used for seasonal, and this is our permanent stock for residents who are here year round. Yeah. Okay, I'm happy to stay if anyone has more questions afterwards, and you didn't want to yell them out to all of us. It's been a pleasure being here. Beautiful place. I spent the last day here, and it's just a gorgeous place in our corner, in this corner of the state. And thank you for having me. Thank you.